This has been a challenging year for banking. We had the bank failures on the coast in March, and the regulators decided that we missed that, so we're going to start really looking at everything. And then coupled with that is the interest rates that keep going up. Banks have an investment portfolio in addition to their loan portfolio. Well, some of our investments are underwater right now because of the interest rates. So we're dealing with liquidity issues, so we have enough funds to loan out money. Loans themselves are not growing at this point in the economy with the higher interest rates. So it's been a challenging year in banking. We're still fighting to get at the top of it. I think we're well positioned on a lot of levels, but right now those regulators are kind of making our lives miserable again.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today, Jeff is interviewing Jane Deterding. Jane is the chairman of the board, general counsel, and chief strategic marketing officer of Citizens Bank of Kansas. She also serves as commissioner on the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission and is involved with Wichita Animal Action League, Wichita Chamber of Commerce, and Wichita Area Delta Gamma Alumnae. Jane has bachelor's degrees in finance and economics from Wichita State University and a law degree from the University of Kansas. You can learn more about Jane at citizensbankofkansas.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Jane.
Jane, welcome to the Corporate Couch today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you and I were introduced by a longtime friend, Rose Matzat,
Yes.
who I went to college with, and I can't wait to hear of what the '80s in New York City was like, or early '90s, to have fun.
We were very, very nice girls.
So we'll dig into that, and you had a great law career, and talk about what you're doing for now, I believe, a fifth generation of banking at the Citizens Bank of Kansas. So it's very exciting to talk to you. Thank you for coming along. So I like to start with a fun question. So even that people that know you fairly well, what one thing would surprise them about you?
The ones that do know me well or don't know me well?
No, that know you fairly well. Yeah. What would say, oh, really? Jane does that, or she's like that? What would that one thing be?
Well, I'm a big dog lover, and we have 4 rescue dogs right now, but I don't know that that's any surprise to people that know me well. A lot of people don't know that I actually did a radio show for a little piece early 90s.
Yeah, it was you and your husband from the basement, I believe.
That's correct. It was called The Money Room.
Nice. Yeah.
About small business and opportunity. So
yeah, could be a great idea for a podcast. Maybe there you go.
Well, you'd have to talk to my ex-husband about that. He's probably already doing it. I don't know.
We'll leave that topic alone and move on. And then you grew up in Western Kansas, Central Kansas?
Right, South Central Kansas, Reno County, small town, Turin, Turon.
Yeah.
And my dad was the banker there, and about 300 people. So,
wow.
Mom knew what we'd done before we got home.
So what was your graduating high school class size?
Well, it was a consolidated. It was a
Uh,
big deal because we
oh,
had like 6 little towns. So I
oh,
had 43 in my class.
wow. There you go.
Yeah.
And that's six schools. Wow.
Yeah.
So growing up, Jane, what did you really like to do?
What did I like to do? I did a lot of music, piano lessons, singing. My sister and I got all the jobs around the house, mowing the lawn, and we loved to go swimming in the summer. And my dad was instrumental in getting a swimming pool in our little community. And so it was always the thing that my mom had this job chart, and we had to do so many jobs before we could go swimming for the afternoon. And boy, when our other friends were mad when their moms found out about that. So everybody recreated my mom's job chart before they could go swimming.
Nice. Did you have any aspirations as a child to be, when you grew up, you wanted to be this? What was this?
Oh, I wanted to be a doctor.
Doctor.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And then I found out there was a lot of science involved with that, which is not my forte.
Just a, just a minor little detour, like.
Minor, right? Yeah,
So you go to Wichita State, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what, as an 18-year-old, did you pick your double major, finance and economics, right away, or did you have a process during the 4-year period?
Oh, yeah. As with most things in my life, I took a circuitous route. I actually did my first semester at the University of Kansas and then transferred to Wichita State. I started out as a music major and, quickly learned that if you could be the top vocalist in a very small high school, but in a vast ocean of excellent singers in a large university, you were just average.
Right.
So I had I got on my liberal arts electives in the music department. And then I switched to what was, probably all along going to be my major of business, finance, and economics.
Yeah. And why those two topics in business?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the bank, with my dad as the banker, and I've always liked numbers, and it just appealed to me. And it was the early '80s, and that was kind of what you did. You got a business degree.
Right.
But I didn't plan to get the econ minor, but found that I loved it with, just the classes that, you take as part of your business electives. And so I just pursued that minor too. And it was fascinating. I still like it.
Yeah, that's great. So you get your degree at Wichita State, and what is your first job out of college, and how'd you get it?
Again, my circuitous route to my current career. I went to work for Senator Bob Dole, and I'd graduated and, applying for jobs, wasn't really in a big hurry. I was enjoying my summer in Wichita. And I'm not quite sure how this happened, to be honest, but I got a call from the chief of staff for Senator Dole in Washington, D.C., lady by the name of Joanne Coe, who was a presence, to be understated. And she said, hey, we have a young lady that is going out on maternity leave, and I got your name as somebody that might be willing to come to DC for a few months to fill in. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure, I can do that. And, and I'd been involved with Young Republicans and things in college and worked on campaigns. So it wasn't totally out of the blue, I guess. But so I did that. I said, sure. And I said, well, when do you want me? And she said, how about Monday?
Oh, geez.
And this was like maybe Monday or Tuesday the prior week. And I'm going, okay, I think I better call my dad. So got it all worked out. And I flew to DC with a couple of suitcases and actually stayed at American University they do summer housing for interns and such. And ended up rooming with a woman who was interning for, oh, I've lost the name, but he was a longtime Arkansas senator, Democrat. So here we are. She was working for the Democrat and I was working for Republican, and we became fast friends.
Oh, nice.
And at the end of the maternity leave period, again, Joe Co. approached me and said, we'd like to keep you on staff. And they offered me either a legislative assistant in DC or a constituent services position in Topeka. And being a bit of a homebody, I said, I think I want to do that Topeka thing. So that's what I did for 4 years. I did constituent services for Senator Dole.
Oh, wow. So, and did you have much interaction? Because with Senator Dole, I mean, obviously he was just a legend in the political arena.
I did. And particularly, it was ironically, more so in Topeka, because he would come out to the state and visit very regularly. That was, he loved coming back to Kansas and seeing the people. So there were two of us in the office, and we were charged with, setting up all the details for getting him places and going with him to events. And, he just, so yeah, I did have a lot of interaction with him. And actually, I would say we became friends certainly after I stopped working for him. He's, he's been gone a bit now, but, he would call me out of the blue. And my kids loved it because he called me on my birthday one year.
Oh, wow.
And my kids were, my oldest was in high school, and she's just sitting there with her mouth open. She goes, "That was Senator Dole?" I go, "Yeah, he wanted to borrow money." So, so it was good. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
And you're so close to that legislative process, and you learn so much. And I think that kind of gelled my idea of, hey, I want to go to law school. Now, my smart ass answer for why I went to law school is I was around a whole bunch of lawyers a lot, and I knew I was smarter than a lot of them. So I thought, if they can do it, I can do it.
There you go. I love it. Just to go back to Senator Dole for a second. I mean, just did he impart any lessons? Obviously you're working with one of the greatest, political figures in U.S. history. I mean, what was it like?
He was such a statesman.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have that in our country right now.
Right.
We don't have people that say, look, for the good of the country, I'm going to talk to the people on the other side of the aisle and forge some sort of consensus. And that was an amazing thing. Just when I was in DC, just watching, he was majority leader at the time, watching the people walk in that office, the Secretary of the Treasury, they'd come in and come to him, and you forge these alliances with people across the aisle. And I think that was, at the time, as a 21, 22-year-old looking at that, it didn't have that much impact. But later in my life, that really taught me a lot about, everybody has their own way and thoughts about doing something. But to be a good leader, you put all the people in the room and figure out a way to work it out. So I would say that's the greatest thing I learned from Senator Dole, is just the ability to negotiate and compromise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he had a gift for remembering people's names. When we'd go on an event, he'd always like, if I don't know his name, remind me, okay? Never happened. Never happened.
Yeah, it seems like the great leaders have that ability. You're the only person in the room when they're talking to you, and so
yeah,
that's fascinating. So your smart ass answer for going to law school you gave, but I mean, really, was it being around that many lawyers? Was it like, hey, I could see myself doing this, or you thought you would be successful at it?
Well, part of it was just the legislative process, that just realizing how the laws were made and up close and personal. And I always thought that I wanted an advanced degree, but I didn't think that maybe the MBA was the right path for me. Um, so it was a challenge, something I was very successful at ultimately. And I remember when I went home, I think it was Thanksgiving before I started the following May, and announced that I was going to take the LSAT and go to law school. And my dad looked at me and said, "Who of your kin is a lawyer?" And I said, "Well, nobody." He says, "Well, how do you think you're going to get a job?" I said, "Well, I guess I'll work hard like everybody else." So ultimately, he wasn't on board, but I
Right.
went to the University of Kansas and redeemed myself. Of course, he bled blue and red, and so after about the first year of law school, it was suddenly his idea for me to go to law school.
That's funny. So you graduate law school and you're in Lawrence, Kansas, right?
Yep,
Uh,
yep. My
and
first job out of law school was with a small firm in Topeka,
okay.
and I learned a lot there. And um, I was approaching my 30th birthday because, I got a late start on that law school thing. And I thought, holy cow, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in Kansas. And I thought, let's go do something different. And I was in a relationship with a man that lived in New York. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to see if I can get a job. And lo and behold, I did. And so I spent about 18 months, 2 years, somewhere around in there working for Hahn and Hessen in New York City. It was pretty much a boutique firm in terms of New York firms. And I was in the bankruptcy department, which I really liked, and it kind of fit my wheelhouse. And that's where I met Rose Madsat, who is still a dear friend of mine.
Yeah, Rose is phenomenal. And it was the law firm. I know at one point it was in the Empire State Building. The
That's where I
office.
was.
Yeah.
And it
Wow.
was hilarious because, I'm here, this kid from Kansas, and oh my gosh, I'm in the Empire State Building, and I go up to the top, like the
Yeah.
first couple of weeks I was there, and
Yeah.
I come back and I'll have our little associates gatherings, and I said, I've been to the top, and here these native New Yorkers have never been to
Never
the
been.
top.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, no. They go, "You did?" I go, "Yeah, you haven't been up there. It's cool."
I grew up an hour from the city. I had never been up there till my kids were 6 and 8. We went back
Yeah,
from Kansas City to New
yeah,
York to visit family. Brought them up there, and actually, Rose gave us a pass to get up, cut the
yeah,
line and all that. So
yeah,
that was,
yeah.
yeah. So you're at Hahn and Hessen, and what was your next career step after that?
Well, I came back to Kansas. I had my sister had a child who was very ill, and I felt like I needed to be back with family. And so I came back to Kansas, and I went to work for a law firm in Wichita, and I was in private practice with a couple of firms for 10 years total before I decided made the well. I guess it's fair to say my dad helped me decide, but uh, he was always giving me this lecture whenever I was home of, so are you going to be a lawyer that owns bank stock, or are you going to be a banker with a law degree? And I was like, well, yeah, I'm practicing law right now. I was doing the work for the bank. He was pleased with what I was doing. And one Christmas, I was home and I had like the flu or something, and he caught me at a weak moment. No, no, I'm kidding. I said, fine, yeah, we'll make the transition. And at the time, we were building out our first branch in Wichita, and I'd kind of been helping oversee, construction since I was right there. And so we opened that in March of 2001. Well, yes, that's when I went to work. It was, I think, April before we actually opened the doors. And so that was my first spot. getting a new branch on the ground in Wichita, Kansas.
Wow. And so explain the history, because I think it was 2022 is basically 100 years,
Right.
it's phenomenal. But talk a little bit about the history and how the bank was started. And
Right. My great grandfather in 1922 purchased with his uncle the controlling stock of a small bank in Atlanta, Kansas, which is, everybody says Atlanta. Oh, no, not Georgia, Kansas. Teeny tiny little bank. And so from there, it started. And when he bought the bank, there was a young man there with the cashier. His name was Ray Deterding. And so Ray stayed on and ultimately married the banker's daughter. And so then he took over at the bank, my grandfather Ray, until he was there, and he died pretty early from a brain tumor in 1963. And so at that point, my dad was in the banking business. He'd been a bank examiner. He bought the small bank in Turin. And so he bought the rest of the stock at Atlanta and was running two banks about 2 hours apart in a small town with two small children. And he was working hard, but he was a gifted banker. And he gradually added more small branches. And at that time, you could not have more than one bank in a holding company. So we had all these little banks and all these call reports for every bank. And finally, we were able to put the banks together in 1997, I believe. And by that time, my sister's husband, Mark Keeney, had joined the bank too. And he ultimately became president of the bank. He's now CEO, and I'm chairman. And when my dad died in 2004, we had a bank of 160 million, and we're just under 500 million now.
wow.
So I'd like to think my dad would be proud of what Mark and I have done.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I know it's on I'll call it your tagline, but what was your dad's famous quote about
Yeah.
banking? I
His
love it.
famous line was, "Banking isn't a money business, it's a people business."
Yeah.
And he walked that every day. I always knew that my dad did a lot for the people in our small towns. And I would just remembered today that, in fact, that one of the things he did was in Turon, there wasn't a lawyer. So he had a firm that he worked with, and he had a young associate attorney come out every Wednesday, just sit in the boardroom. If anybody had any questions, they could just come in and ask. And he was very generous with people. And then, after he died, I heard so many stories I'd never heard about his generosity. But it is about the people. It's about the relationships, not only our customers, but certainly our staff and our communities. We're very much involved in all the communities where we have banks, and we're very proud of that. That's how we bank.
Right. No, I think that's phenomenal. I mean, I think that touches, as the banking industry consolidates, and, smaller banks are swallowed up by the, corporate banks. It's just, you lose that personal touch. And so it's great that you continue that tradition, and that's how it all started. It's kind of it's a wonderful life, type of banking,
Kind of, yeah.
which is great. Yeah, so tell me about, you were about 3 years in, and I believe your father died suddenly. How did that all impact you?
Yeah, it was, let's see, I joined the bank in 2001, and my dad died in 2004. My dad had a plan, and unfortunately, most of it was just in his head, and it was a need to know. And you didn't get to get the whole picture in one conversation. You got little bits and pieces. And so he had a stroke that he never recovered from. So even communicating with him in the last 2 weeks of his life was very difficult. We as a family were, we were stunned, obviously, and we really didn't know what we wanted to do right off the bat. And then to make matters worse, the regulators came in and said, Max was the credit cop. My dad, Max Deterding, was the credit cop. And we think you need to put more constraints in place for your credit policies and that sort of thing. And we actually operated under a memorandum for almost 2 years to implement new credit standards. And so here we are grieving over my dad, and we're trying to make sure we get the bank positioned that it's steady if we decide to sell it, or if we want to keep going. And we had a lot of soul searching. We worked with a small business consultant, family consultant, that helped us work through. And ultimately, obviously, we decided that we wanted to keep the bank and make it work. And we worked really, really hard in those first years to get the ship righted in the eyes of the regulator and go on down the road. And now I would tell you that was probably the best thing that could have happened, to get those policies and procedures cleaned up after Dad died. He was a seat of the pants old school banker,
Right.
He had, I remember in his desk drawer, he had a pad of promissory notes. Just like you would fill out a blank check, he would fill out a promissory note. When somebody came in, they'd sign it. Of course, in this day of regulation, we can't do that, but
Right.
it was phenomenal.
Oh,
And so anyway, that's where we got through that and made our bank stronger. We're still utilizing like those loan committee things that we established in that 2004 to 2006 range to run our bank. And we've received excellent ratings as a bank. I mean, we can't tell, the rating, that's a big
Right.
secret, but
Right.
excellent ratings. And we have a good bank.
Yeah. No,
Very proud of that.
yeah, it's a great story. So just to go back in terms of when you started at the bank, Jane. So I mean, you're a lawyer, right? And you're very successful, and you grew up in the banking industry because
Right.
your grandfather, or great grandfather, and your dad were in it. But like, what was the biggest surprise coming from a legal background and working at law firms to, working at the bank and running, helping run the bank?
Well, I had an inkling because, I was doing the bank's legal work, but, with my lawyer hat on, I was always looking at loan documentation and knowing what needed to be there and finding the oopses along the way, which just made my head explode. When we bought a small, well, the FDIC gave us the opportunity to take it over, a small bank. And I went in and I spent 3 days going through the whole loan portfolio. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, what did we do? So yeah, I think that. And then the second piece would be the regulators. It's a moving target. You do exactly what you think you're supposed to do. And they come in and say, well, maybe we ought to do something a little different. This has been a challenging year for banking. We had the bank failures on the coast in March. And, the regulators decided that, we missed that. So we're going to start really looking at everything. And then coupled with that is the interest rates that keep going up. And not to get too banky techie, but we banks have an investment portfolio in addition to their loan portfolio, and some of our investments, are underwater right now because of the interest rates. So we're dealing with liquidity issues. So we have enough funds to loan out money. Loans themselves are not growing at this point in the economy with the higher interest rates. So it's been a challenging year in banking, and we're still fighting to get at the top of it. I think we're well positioned on a lot of levels, but right now those regulators are kind of making our lives miserable again.
Yeah, obviously, all businesses were impacted by the pandemic, but what did you see? What was kind of the biggest changes? Pre-pandemic to how the bank runs today.
Well, if you think back, when the pandemic hit, aside from the logistics of keeping the bank open with people sick and all that, but when the pandemic hit, the Fed rate went down to literally zero. And so we go from zero in 2020, 21 to where it is now. It's gone up, we're at 6 something now. So managing that has been a challenge. I will say that, for all the grief that some of the administration has gotten for the stimulus, that the PPP loans and those stimulus checks, kept the economy going. They really, really did. A lot of conservatives will tell you that that wasn't a good plan, and I'm going to tell you it was a good plan, not only for businesses, but just for individuals. But I think the other challenge from that, of course, is the hiring pool. A lot of people during the pandemic, they were getting those stimulus checks. Maybe they weren't applying for jobs. And, coming out of it, the rates that we're having to pay our hourlies have gone up. The pool of candidates seems to be shrinking. I don't know what these people are living on because that stimulus money is long gone.
Right.
So it's very challenging. It's been very challenging.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of businesses, that attracting talented people to work is been difficult,
Yeah.
since the pandemic. So it's just an interesting time. Plus, most of your employees can't work from home, right? You need people to run the bank.
Right.
So it's
We did pretty good. We had about a 3-week period where our lobbies were closed and we were only running drive-through services. And then, of course, appointment, if somebody needed to see a loan officer, we'd let them in. But we had people sick. We couldn't staff it any other way. So, but we weren't alone in that. It's a lot of businesses had to do that.
And, no one can predict the future, Jane, but where do you see the banking industry going in the next 10 years?
Good question. I guess if my crystal ball is working today, I would tell you that hopefully we're at the top or very near top of these interest rate increases. And another thing that these interest rates have done is put kind of a quash on any kinds of mergers and acquisitions in banking because you just can't make the numbers work. So in my crystal ball, I would see after we see some of that settling out of the interest rates, that probably you'll see more consolidation of banks. We just in Kansas as a microcosm, the number of small banks has shrunk by over 100 over the last 5 years. And we see that now. A lot of those are other community banks buying smaller community banks in Kansas, which something we did in 2019 is we bought a small bank also. And I think you'll see more of that when the interest rate stabilizes so that the banks themselves have the loan growth, that their investment policies and kind of level out, and they can start thinking about acquiring banks that, right now it doesn't make sense to try to do that.
Right.
I think you'll probably see more crypto coming up. Those are challenges. There's still so many scams with crypto. We as a community bank strongly believe in person to person, but we do have all the digital bells and whistles for our customers to use. So there will be more of that. And I think it will be interesting what our younger generation come as they grow into adulthood, what they want from banking.
Right.
We've seen that they want all the digital bells and whistles, but they also want a banker. They may not put it in those terms, but they want to be able to reach out to somebody and sit down across the desk and say, explain to me how this whole mortgage thing works. So I think as a community bank, our challenge is to touch those younger generation now and help them understand the utility in having a bank, a real honest to God bricks and mortar bank with people they get to know and trust.
Right.
And one of the ways we're doing that as a bank is we now have 2 high school branches. We have in Derby and then in Circle High School, which is in Butler County, where we just opened this August. And those branches are staffed by students. And, we have limited hours like before school and during lunch breaks. And they're tagged as an educational branch because those kids not only take deposits and give cash and open accounts, but they're also charged with giving presentations to younger classes in the high school and the middle schools, so that we start teaching these younger kids about managing their finances at a younger age, because it's a challenge and it's a problem. There's a lot of young people that just don't know how to do a budget, how to balance their checkbook, etc. So we believe strongly in that program, just helping kids get a leg up, starting to understand what they're going to need as adults.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal initiative, having raised a few of my own children. But yeah, and not only balancing a checkbook, like what is a checkbook?
Right. What is a check?
Check, right.
Well, yeah, we actually, for those high school accounts, we don't even give them checks. We just give them a debit card.
Yeah, it's yeah, I find it interesting. I don't write many checks anymore myself, but there are a few people that still only take checks. So,
oh yeah, we still sell them.
Yeah, very interesting. Jane, there's 2 groups I'd love to help on the podcast because I'm empathetic to both. One is recent college graduates when they come out of school and or about to come out of school. Wichita State, KU, name the university or college. They teach how to get a degree, but they don't really teach you how to pursue a career and get a great job. What advice do you have for a recent college graduate in terms of pursuing, getting that first job and starting your career?
Don't say no to opportunities that might not be what you thought you wanted to do. When I graduated with my finance and economics degree, there was nothing on my radar that said go to DC and work for a senator. Nothing on my radar. So I would say branch out on what you think you want to do. And understand that you are not God's gift to the job pool. Yeah, you've got this degree, but so do most of the other people. So be willing to work hard, maybe for less money than you want to do from the beginning, but to get experience that will be invaluable. I have recent college grads that work for us, and they're on the front teller line. And they talk about career advancement. And I'm like, you put a couple years under your belt, then we'll talk. So it's still a lot of hard work, doing the job, showing up, being willing and able and doing everything you can to learn everything you can. Even if your first job isn't where you're going to end up, take the opportunity to learn whatever job you're at.
No, that's great advice. I think every generation is different, but it's just, I think it's harder to be a leader now because of all the different generations you are, the millennials,
Absolutely.
the Gen Xers, the baby boomers. So it's a very diverse work pool right now. And it really, you need to be an empathetic leader and have high EQ and all that. And that goes to the second group I like to help. So, you're hiring people that are individual contributors. They start as bank tellers or customer service agents or whatever, but they're individual contributors, but then they get promoted and now they're ahead of, 5 or 6 different people. For the first time, they're leading people from an HR perspective. What advice do you have for those people as they begin their leadership journey?
Listen, listen more, talk less. We're very generous with our development of our young people, and take advantage of those. That we work with Wichita State, the Center for Management Development. We send our branch managers through that leadership training, and it's good. And we're sending 3 people to the ICBA Lead Forward conference in Kansas City later this month. And if you are given the opportunity to lead, if you spark that interest in your employer, that you have that ability, then say yes to every opportunity you're given to grow, and bring ideas to us. We've had people say, hey, I found this conference, or I'd like to do this webinar. And you know what? 99% of the time, we're going to say, heck yeah. And so dive in deep and be all you could be.
There you go. I love it. Jane, thank you so much for being on the Corporate Couch today. I really love what you're doing with the bank, and you're just, I love your energy, and I so looked forward to this conversation. So thank you for being on.
Thank you very much for having me.
There were so many things about Jane's episode that I really liked. I mean, I think a lot of our guests, Jane, I asked her about her major, and it started, she was going to be a doctor or, musician.
Yeah.
And then changed majors. And she said something like, like most things in my life, took a circuitous route, right? So what she started going towards always changed, and she had examples of that later on also. And I mean, that happens to a lot of our guests when you look at their career journey. So I thought that was interesting. And then, she had, worked very closely with one of the great, statesmen, that the U.S. has ever had, Senator Bob Dole from Kansas.
Great guy.
Great experience there. Oh, yeah. And just, what I loved, she grew up in Turin, Kansas, population 120, and ends up working in both D.C. and New York City, 2 of the most populous places in the United States.
And then she comes back to Wichita and runs the family business.
Yeah. And another, Citizens Bank of Kansas, over 100 years old. Started in Atlanta, Kansas, which never knew Atlanta, Kansas even existed. So just, and, how her, father's death impacted her life. And just a lot of great stories that came out of it. Joe, what did you think of the episode?
Oh, yeah, she was absolutely great. The Bob Dole stories, they match everything I've ever heard about Bob Dole as being somebody that worked on both sides of the aisle and was just a super nice person, as well as a great statesman and politician. I was reminded in Jane's story where she was talking about having to keep the bank open during COVID. And it reminded me of a story that I had at my local Waffle House. I went to my Waffle House in the middle of COVID. It was actually just when we were just getting over the hump. So businesses were starting to open up and everything, and went to the Waffle House. And they said they are only open for takeout, that they couldn't serve me in the restaurant. And I said, well, why is that? She said, because we can't hire enough people manage the tables. We can only hire enough people to manage the grill and to throw things into styrofoam boxes and ship them out the door. And I thought it was a shame that here Waffle House this is good business, and they may not pay the best in the world, but they'll take anybody, they'll train anybody to do. And if you want to work hard, you can. But there were so many people that were actually paid more to stay at home during the COVID crisis than to earn a decent living at Waffle House. The Waffle House literally had to shut down half their business, because not because the demand wasn't there, but because they couldn't hire enough people. I thought that was a shame, and it was interesting then that Jane talked about that was the exact same experience that they had at the bank, that they're having a hard time hiring people because the talent pool is drying up, that they're paying so many people just to stay home and not work.
Yeah, it was definitely a crazy time. And what I love about your reference is, we're both big Waffle House fans. So you have to sit at the counter at a Waffle House because you get the employee drama. It's really fascinating.
It's an experience. It's a Southern experience all its own. If you have some listeners that live up in the northwest part of the country where there aren't any Waffle Houses, I really feel bad for them.
Well, at least they have White Castle. But
they have White Castle.
Anyhow, based on Jane's conversation, Joe, what leadership lessons do you have for them?
Yeah, today we're going to go to that great philosopher Michael Scott, who one time said, "Wikipedia is the best thing ever. Anyone in the world can write anything they want about any subject, so you know you're getting the best possible information."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.